Good morning, afternoon, and hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, The Future of Recruiting, Technology, and Artificial Intelligence. As most of you all are well aware, my name is Max Smith. I'm the Communications Director for 501c Services. In case you hadn't heard, we're a 100% employee-owned company, and we provide services to about 2,500 nonprofits nationwide through programs like the 501c Agency Trust, You Insure, and Nonprofit HR Services. Many of you on today's webcast are already working with us, and I thank you very much for doing so. Before I introduce our speaker, I'm going to cover some housekeeping. That way I can repeat myself later on for anybody who comes on late. If you have any questions, Ben will take questions throughout. He'll stop periodically to check the inbox, and then we'll also have a question section at the end. So please don't hesitate to ask something. You know, if Ben's talking about puppies and you have a puppies question, best to talk about puppies before we move on to kittens. Also, today's program is worth HRCI and SHRM credit. You all know the drill with that. If you need those certification credits, you just need to fill out our post-event poll so I know which one to send you. That poll pops up as soon as we're done. And also you'll get an email later today that will have the poll in there as well. The materials are already in the handout section of your GoToWebinar browser there. Just click on handouts. You can download that file there. We will also send it to you later today in our post-event email. Also, next month, we do have a new webinar, Terminating Employees and How to Minimize Your HR Risk When You Do So. It's at the end of March. I'll be sending everybody a link to that program as well. That's a brand new one for us. That's actually being produced by Sonia from our HR services staff. So we're looking forward to that new program from her. Now, as I hand it off to Ben, I'd like to remind everybody, Ben joined us last year. He is a recruiter through Weiser Innovations, which is a boutique recruiting firm in the Pacific Northwest, and he's one of our partners. And we look forward to hearing what he has to say about how to help your recruiting process with technology. Ben, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great. Thank you for giving everybody this platform so that we can share this time and talk about technology, like you said, technology and the future of recruiting. So again, thank you everybody for joining. If you do have a pertinent question, like Max said, fire it away and we can address it in real time, and then we'll also be doing questions at the end. So the purpose of this webinar is to learn how we can leverage new technologies to build an effective recruiting function. It's really, really important that we utilize the tools available to us so that we can bring in the talent that we need so that we can achieve our mission, we can build the culture that we're looking for, and ultimately we can hire the people that we want to hire. So for today's agenda, I'll tell you a little bit about my company, Weiser Innovations. We'll talk through the purpose of technology. We'll look at the technologies in the recruiting process, how we can automate the candidate experience, how we can leverage technology in the interview process, look at sourcing and engaging candidates as well, because that's crucial. We'll be presenting a case study. And then, as we said in the title, looking at artificial intelligence. And then finally, we're going to talk about the cautions of technology in recruiting and a few key takeaways. So to share a little bit about my background, I've always been a mission-driven professional, whether that's through for-profit companies or nonprofit companies. I started my career working in youth-focused organizations, both in education as well as enrichment and recreation. I then moved on, got my certificate in human resources from Cornell University, transitioned into recruiting. I did do some work in human resources as well. But my area of expertise, and quite honestly, what I just love doing, is making sure we bring in the right talent. And so when I did that, like I said, I've recruited for the nonprofit sector specifically, but I've also worked internationally and nationally in the for-profit, dealing with medical interpreting, public safety, pharmaceutical manufacturing. So, I'm making sure that when I'm engaging in recruitment, it's not just for the organization, but it's doing something that really enhances life for everybody. So to talk a little bit about my organization, Weiser Innovations, we're not a traditional staffing firm where you call us up and say, I need a temp receptionist for 3 months. What we look to do is we really look to integrate with our partners. And by integrating, we're able to build teams and a culture for highly successful organizations. It's just impossible to provide great services or great products if you don't have great teams and great hires. Everything originates with the people that are doing the work. And so that's something that we really strive for. So to get started, we are going to talk about the purpose of technology in business. And the reason for this is when we look at that, it applies to how we operate within recruiting. And a key takeaway, and we'll get to this at the end, but a key theme that you'll see is we're not losing the human aspect of how we do business. And I think that's crucial to remember. What technology does is it allows us to improve how we do our business, but it doesn't do our business for us. And so when we look at the basics of technology, we look at our word processing, our electronic bookkeeping, our scheduling, all things that everybody does regardless of job functions. We're all writing documents. We're all looking at numbers in some way, shape, or form, and we all keep a calendar. It's just the way it has to be. The next piece that technology affects business is with communication. And whether that's an instant messenger so you can communicate with the person across the hall or across the country, whether that's video meetings or doing webinars such as these, or whether it's leveraging networking to promote what you're doing, or have a conversation with a vendor or a partner across seas. Having that technology and communication just makes it more effective. The next piece where technology influences business as a whole is in accuracy. I think we all started using calculators at some point in our life simply because it helps limit the errors we make when we do math. Well, as technology advanced and we're utilizing spreadsheets and accounting and record keeping, it's that same concept of just keeping things organized, keeping things together, and really setting us up so that we don't have those, or we minimize those errors that we might make directly. And finally, it's efficiency. The goal of technology is to make life easier. It doesn't take away, again, the human piece of it, but it does. It makes life easier. So as we move into technologies in recruiting process, we're going to build off of the technologies in business. And we're going to start with looking at the impact that it makes. So in looking at technologies, they've changed the way we recruit. And it's increased productivity, it's saved time, it's organized data, and it's allowed us to be more strategic. I remember, when I first got into recruiting, electronic job boards were at their infancy, and we were still posting ads in newspapers. By leveraging the electronic jobs boards, it really allows for a global platform, a global marketing strategy, so that you're able to brand your organization, whether it's on a national or international scope, because with the job climate the way it is in a lot of positions, we have candidates that relocate, and we have candidates that are interested in what we're doing, and there may not be that opportunity where they live, so they look someplace else to do it. This gives us that. It also allows for a digitally governed organization, and a lot of these job boards understand what needs to be in a job description for compliance issues, and they'll even prompt you to do so. So there's a lot of advantages to that. The next significant piece of technology is an applicant tracking system. And what this allows us to do, it has all the advantages of a spreadsheet, but it saves us time. It organizes our data for us. It benchmarks our analytics and records our reporting. It manages the recruiting process. And again, it maintains compliance, which is absolutely critical. Next, when we look at social media, this is a great way to find and attract candidates, both actively and passively. It's a great way to brand your organization and get that recognition. And that's not just for recruiting talent, but also for recruiting donors. It's the exact same process. And having that brand and organizational recognition, it's huge. It's great when people know who you are, even if you don't know who they are. And the final piece of this is that the mobile piece, optimizing things for small screens, for text messages and emails. People apply for jobs while they're commuting. You walk around the restaurants, people are on their phones. It's just a very essential way that we operate now. And so by leveraging that, we reach an entire population. And it allows us to engage basically anyone, anywhere, anytime. So when we look to automate the candidate experience, being efficient in the candidate process, it allows us to not just engage with people and attract people, but keep people. So when we look at this, how do we make sure we're doing this? Well, the first thing, as I just mentioned, is leveraging mobile devices. You have to be where people are. And if people are on their mobile devices, and I don't care if that's a cellular phone, if that's a tablet, if that's a laptop, you have to have an application that makes it easy for candidates to get to you and to show interest in working for you. And if we make it challenging for candidates to get to us, they're not going to. And that's just the reality. No one wants to have to search for hours to figure out how to find your jobs or how to apply for your jobs. And so by leveraging mobile devices, they get to us anywhere, anytime, and it's really advantageous. The next stage of automating the process, and I'm sure we've all had paper applications in some point in time, but by automating the process and allowing a candidate to upload their resume and having that resume parsed so that they don't have to manually input that data that's already on a document, for them, they appreciate and they recognize that this is an organization that even on smaller levels appreciates their time and will try to take care of them. Having a central place to store profiles and have a candidate have access so that they can update, having the ability for a candidate to have real-time feedback. These are all things that are important because these are all things that will lose people in the hiring process. The next thing that automation and technology allows us to do is create a really potentially fun candidate environment. And one of the things that I really like is leveraging gamification. And this is something that I've seen quite a bit in hospitality industries, particularly in the hotel industries. There are certain hotels which, as part of their application process and hiring process, they'll let candidates play a game on how they run a hotel. And this is something, it takes a little work on the back end to create it, but it's something really innovative that allows us to assess how a candidate will function in a certain environment in a way that's fun for them and gives us the outcomes we need. The next way to create a engaging candidate environment is really utilizing virtual reality. And a lot of companies, a lot of organizations are starting to do this with virtual tours and leveraging virtual employment experiences within the company, including the recruiting videos, because that's part of it, but also separate. When people go onto a website and they want to look, they want to get a feel for what it's like to be at your organization, and having people that are members of the organization talk about why they chose to work there, and why, even more importantly, why they choose to stay there, and why it's a great place to be, is really one of the best selling tools we can have, and it doesn't involve us. So utilizing those things, letting somebody see what the office looks like, they now have a feel for who you are, which really helps to ingrain them into the culture before they're even part of the organization. The next benefit of the automation is it saves time. Going through pieces of paper, it really, it's not a good use of resources. And by freeing up recruiters' times to have processes automated, they can now cultivate long-term relationships, which is absolutely crucial, because as any organization grows, you may have someone who's interested in the organization now, but there's not a fit for them. But by having that recruiter have that relationship, they can call them in a year, in 2 years. And that's something that is really crucial to prolonged success. And now, just looking at the automated part of automation, a very newly effective technology and a growing technology are chatbots. And what that allows us to do is have a mechanism where if a candidate sends a simple request, how long is the typical recruiting process within the organization? Well, as the recruiter, I can get on and answer that, but that takes time out of my day. If you have a chatbot, it can automatically respond to them and say, our typical recruiting process is between 3 and 6 weeks. You can expect this at stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. And now your candidate's been engaged. They have their information. They feel good about where they are. And it didn't take time away from us doing additional activities. The next piece that I'm going to talk about is digitizing and digitization. And, this is also relatively new. And I worked at an organization where we were doing everything manually. I had to print out the offer letters. I had to take it to my hiring manager, to my CEO, so that it can get signed. And the problem with that is when the person that needs to sign it isn't there, you sometimes have to wait days or a week. Within that process, we lose candidates and we lose efficiency. So by leveraging technology like this, not only does it come back quicker because people can sign wherever they are, you can also track where things are in the process. So if something gets stuck, you can ping the person and ask them, go ahead and sign it so I can hire. It also allows within the background check process to digitize that as well, where you're leveraging technology to shoot your candidate information, and then they can go ahead and that information comes back to you. And with the right technology and the right systems, your transitioning to onboarding also takes place in the same method, so that it's really seamless and effective, so that they're moving from being hired to moving to being an employee in a very efficient way. So the next piece I want to talk about is the interview process and the impact of technology on that interview process. And looking at how we keep this efficient is both critical for our internal resources, maximizing their time, as well as our candidates. We all know when we have an opening, the people internal have to fill that until we hire the right person. So time is really, really valuable, especially during the hiring process. So as I mentioned earlier, leveraging videos and communication, this saves time. If we can do a video interview and people don't have to travel and they don't have to spend money on traveling, an interview process where you're spending money on traveling, you're spending about $1,000 just on that one interview. But if we can leverage a video interface, we get to see how someone responds. We get to see how somebody interacts. We get to see how they prepare professionally. Are they wearing a t-shirt? Are they wearing a suit and tie? And it really maximizes our time and the candidate's time to have that face-to-face interaction. It also allows us to organize our interview process. With having the right technology, we can create and then store interview questions so that not just one person has it, but whomever is involved can go and have a central location for that. One of the biggest stresses on recruiters is organizing interviews. It's looking at scheduling and when can we get somebody in and who's available. Well, by having the right technology, it takes care of a lot of that because we can look at multiple calendars at the same time. We can coordinate people. We can really set us up so that we're productive and we're putting ourselves where we need to be and we're not spending hours trying to make something work. The next piece, which is very important, is organizing, commenting, ranking candidates within the hiring process. And by organizing, I mean there are candidates that are good for the position and candidates that aren't. Well, by being able to rank them and who is your top candidate, who's a candidate that's just not a fit. For example, if I'm hiring a chief technology officer and somebody has applied and they've never even done help desk, they're not my chief technology officer, I can automatically rank them towards the bottom so that we're not spending time on them. And being able to have that, especially if you have 10, 15, 20 positions open, it really allows us to keep track of what we're doing and how we're doing it. And the next piece is the evaluation templates and real-time feedback. And whenever we have an interview process, it's important that we evaluate the candidates so that we can compare and get everybody's input on whether or not this person is somebody we should hire. By having a centralized location for that and being able to present in real time, it really allows us to maximize our time and speed up our hiring process so we're only moving forward with, the candidates that we need to. So the next piece I want to talk about is actually bringing candidates to us. So you can't interview if we don't have the people to interview. So by digitally sourcing, which is basically just finding the candidates and then engaging them, we have to get people to our organization. That's critical. And utilizing that technology, it allows us a reach for both passive and active candidates. And so leveraging social media. Social media is a great tool because the majority of people out there are present somewhere on some form of social media, even if it's not theirs directly, and they're leveraging their organization's social media. It's critical because it allows us to find people who may have a profile that speaks to our organization, who are not necessarily actively applying for jobs, but if you send them the right information, might consider it. And very often, those are the people we hire. It also allows us to look in areas that are not immediate to us. Or even if we live in a large metropolitan area. I grew up in New York City, and I think about how huge New York City is. Just being able to access all 5 boroughs is a tremendous opportunity. The next piece that we can look at is groups and digital meeting places and areas where we know people that have a certain interest will be. There are groups for CFOs, there's groups for marketing people, there's groups for HR people. And that really lets us go to where the people who do what we need done in the areas that we need it done, where they are. It allows us to leverage our team members so that they can promote our openings, they can promote our organizations, and thus extend the reach of who we see. And then having our organizational sites, not just our website, but organizational sites on social media, so that if we're having events, people can see those photos. If we're gaining awards, people can see that we're getting recognized. And that really not only pushes the mission of the organization, like I said earlier, not just for people to work with us, but also on the donor side, it presents the same level of engagement. The next piece that the digital age and technology has allowed us to do is review work. And this is something that can be really advantageous. I know this, especially when I hire people that have to do marketing. A lot of people that do that have work samples. They have their own websites. When I need to hire someone that's done writing, whether it's technical writing or whether it's writing in for donor engagement, a lot of that information you'll find on the web. You can look it up. A lot of information, I know this from when I hire software people. There are a lot of free coding sites. I can leverage that with my experts internally, and we can go there and see what code they've written, see what software languages they need. So there's a lot of information that's just readily available for us that we can go look at that allows us to really see what our candidates are capable and what they've done in a professional environment, even before or while we're in an interview stage. And finally, easier outreach. Whether it's emails, an email finder so that we can get somebody's email address and reach out to them. I'll be honest, I use an email finder. Whether it's leveraging and text messaging, or whether it's doing something that's just personal, so that when you connect to someone, the message is something that resonates with them. And doing that, we leverage all of this. So there's a lot of advantages to digitally sourcing who comes into our organization and really going after the people that we want. And so now one of my favorite things, which is artificial intelligence. And a lot of people get nervous with artificial intelligence. And the way that I help to remediate that is really thinking about some of the simpler artificial intelligence, because all it is leveraging the computer to do a process for us. And when we utilize a calculator, it's artificial intelligence. But we want to leverage technology to be more dynamic. And so, as we've talked about, automating sourcing processes. When we do a search and we put in search terms, and then profiles come back that match those predetermined criteria, that's leveraging artificial intelligence. And we can do this within our own applicant tracking systems because we build our own database of candidates. We can also do this on external sites. so that we really maximize our ability to reach the people we want to reach, and that's necessary for us to reach. As I mentioned before, utilizing the chat bots, and we can really personalize them so that they represent our organizations. They represent the message that we want to say in the way we want to say it. And this is a relatively new technology in the effectiveness that it really has an impact, and it's productive. And what this does is this really increases our candidate engagement, because they can have real-time access to the answering of questions. Artificial intelligence also allows us to personalize the employee value proposition. Crucial. People like to know how it impacts them. And so with artificial intelligence, and this also brings in some pieces of machine learning, which is a newer technology. It allows us the capability to analyze millions of data points. And for us to go through that, that'll take days or months. But you can leverage your computer to go through, an entire spreadsheet and pull out what you need in seconds. And so all of those things are part of leveraging the intelligence of technology as opposed to our own intelligence directly. And this way, when we are speaking to people, we're speaking to what is important to them and messaging it by what's important to us. And as we think about recruiting, a large part of it is selling. We have to sell people on why they want to work with us as opposed to with another organization. But it's also data analysis, it's marketing, it's mastering technology. And the artificial intelligence helps us do all of those things by analyzing those data points and understanding how we should market and how we should look at the different trends in where people are applying and where we get the most talent, so that we're spending our money properly and we're not just doing things to do them. And finally, as talent acquisition becomes more dynamic, we need to think about our recruiting teams, because as much as we leverage technology, and as much value as it brings, we need specialists. We need people that know how to maximize that. We need to have teams that can best utilize this. And to give a personal example, my last recruiting team, I had senior recruiters. I had people doing sourcing. I had someone helping with scheduling. I had a really dynamic team. But the position that I wanted to bring on and that I was advocating to bring on was really a data analyst who could leverage the technology and leverage the reports that we were running to really dive deep into trends and really dive deep into a lot of that data. So as I just mentioned, to make sure we are working our budget properly, make sure we are getting in front of the right candidates, make sure that the feedback that we're getting is feedback that we're now using and incorporating into a plan. So it's important to remember, as we're building our talent acquisition teams, that we do need to leverage the right people so that we are leveraging our technology properly. So to give an example, a case study relative to some of the work that I've done, and this was with a public safety company. When I started there, they had no centralized recruiting function. Recruiting was typically either going to a hiring manager or most frequently going out to an agency. And there was no process for it, and they were wasting a ton of money. So the first thing that I was tasked with was not only the immediate recruiting, but it was also setting up the function within the organization. And so it was really jumping in both feet into the deep end, which was a really, really fun, for me, fun way to get started, and something that I really enjoy, because you get to define and create and implement a strategy, systems, processes, and procedures, which makes the recruiting process effective. So my solution to this challenge was really getting a applicant tracking system and really identifying what tools I needed for sourcing. And, you know, the organization that I was working with, I didn't have $1 million budget. The applicant tracking system that I chose, which was extremely dynamic, cost me about $300 a month. And there are some that are cheaper, there are some that are more expensive, but this one really met my needs as a solo practitioner within recruiting. And then I went and I found the proper sourcing tools and brought them into what I was doing as well. By doing this, I was able to organize my time, organize my work, track my activities, run reporting, ensure compliance, and really create what I needed to build within this organization. Now, the result, it was a highly effective recruiting function. And when this company ultimately sold, one of the reasons that the company that acquired us did was because they didn't have an internal recruiting function, and they valued what we had set up, and they wanted to integrate that within what they do. And even more directly, I had easier communication with my candidates, like I mentioned earlier, quicker scheduling, and it made sourcing more productive. It also made recruiting a lot simpler for my hiring managers. Because we were digitizing things and everything was recorded, my interview notes were there. So if ever there was an issue, able to pull them up. If there was a conflict, we could go back to our notes. If we are scheduling, everything is right there. I can see their calendars and coordinate it, send them an invite, and it's done quickly. Additionally, with this, you know, when I needed them to sign offer letters, I just hit a button, and like I said earlier, it was an entirely digitized process. And so, going from an interview to an offer to an acceptance to a start, the only lag time within that was running background checks. And to some degree, we don't control that, but to get them into the background check process took minutes. And so it was really, really a productive process by bringing in this technology, especially as a team of one. So let's talk about some of the cautions within the recruiting, with using technology in recruiting. And as valuable as it is, and as important as it is, and as great as it is, we do have to really remember that things have to be used properly. And, you know, the first thing we need to look at is, you know, is it more important to be fast, or is it, you know, and do we leverage speed or do we leverage quality? And although artificial intelligence can help, you know, the candidate identification, we want to make sure we're not missing good candidates who are filtered out for whatever reason. And so it is important to remember to go through and look at those applications. It might very well be that you had somebody who volunteered at an organization, and maybe they volunteered in donor engagement, and they were doing sales for another organization. Well, that sales experience can translate, but for whatever reason, maybe it wasn't picked up. So we really need to make sure that we check what we're doing and not just rely on our technology 100%. we also need to remember, people talk about bias and eliminating bias. Bias is this, bias is that. But all computer software, all the algorithms, all the artificial intelligence, they all have bias within them. And that's because a person wrote them. Therefore, the systems that we're using have the bias of those people that wrote those algorithms. And that's something that we have to be aware of. We also have to remember that an algorithm cannot factor in emotion, and it can miss context. And so as the recruiters, as the hiring managers, we have to catch that behind our technology. And it doesn't mean our technology is failing. It's just we have to understand that it's not 100%. And there's also, within talking about bias, some bias is important and some bias is necessary. As we hire for people that are mission driven, that fit with our cultures, fit with our teams, we want to make sure that we have people that represent our organization, not just as what our organization is today, but as who our organization is going to be tomorrow. And looking within that, we have to, as people, keep those biases, because we don't want to bring somebody in who on paper looks dynamite, but culturally is going to destroy us. And the next thing that we have to really be aware of is we can have too much data and we can get caught up within that data. It's great to be able to look at trends, and it's great to be able to look at all of these things, but we have to remember what's important, what's valuable, what do we actually need, and then focus on that. If for an organization, if it doesn't matter how many people applied for a position, then why are we looking at that? And we just don't want to be overcome with the data and lose focus on our efficiencies and our effectiveness and our quality. So our summary, our takeaways. The goal of technology, it's to make life easier. And it's also important to remember, without people, technology is irrelevant. It's absolutely irrelevant. Next, recruiting does not happen without the people in our organization. It doesn't. And we can only rely on technology so much, but we need to make sure that we have talented recruiters and talented hiring managers running this process. Technology can help us organize it and help us streamline it, but it doesn't control it. It also doesn't create it. And this is really crucial, because people get very, very excited about technology, and they absolutely should, but we can't take the personal out of it. And like I said before with the algorithms, the technology is only as good as the people who create it and the people that utilize it. If you don't know how to utilize a software, it does no good. And if you utilize it wrong, and I'll give a perfect example of this. I walked into a company that I was tasked with fixing their recruiting function. And the first problem that I found was their applicant tracking system was not used right. There were duplicate profiles. There were missing notes. There were just a mess of organization. And so the people that utilized it didn't utilize it in the method that was necessary, therefore making that technology worthless. And we had to basically start from scratch. So we do have to recognize that although we have these tools have to be managed and utilized in a way that adds value. And that speaks to this next point of, for the technology to work, it really goes back to the people behind the technology and the people on our teams. And, I spend some time reading what people say, and they talk about how, applicant tracking systems are the ones that determine whether or not they get a job. It's totally false. People determine it. People are the ones that put in the filters. People are the ones that ultimately review resumes. People are the ones that ultimately conduct interviews. We just use these tools so that we do it in a way that is effective. Just like we may use a calculator, just like we use a car. It's easier to drive to the grocery store than it is to walk home carrying 15 bags. It's the same type of concept. And as I've mentioned before in talking about bias, we have to remember that it's impossible to totally remove it. And bias is important, as we want to make sure that we're bringing in the right people. It's not just a black and white based on technical capability and skills, but it is crucial that we understand that we are trying to bring in culture. And the only way we can assess for that is by engaging and by being people with people. And that's something that can get lost, but it never should, because it is really important that we remember we're people, we're the ones working, we're bringing in people, and we need to be able to work with the people that we bring in so that we can ultimately work with the people that are either members of our organizations or the populations we serve within our organizations. And that's something that we cannot lose track of. So what I want to do now is I want to open this up with questions. And I set this up so that we would have a good amount of time to answer questions. And I see one here. I'm going to try to open it. What starting position would be paramount in starting an effective recruiting system? So when I'm looking at bringing in a recruiting system, I look at a couple of things. One, I'm looking at who's managing that system, who's utilizing that system. I also look at what are our needs organizationally today as well as tomorrow. And some of the things that I look at, what is our growth trajectory? Are we international? Do we have to deal and work with things like the GDPR in Europe? So it's really doing a needs assessment and then finding what system works best and also what system can possibly integrate with the other systems we use. And so for me, in looking at that, it's actually a partnership between our IT teams, our recruiting, and our human resources to make sure that we are bringing in technology that can integrate and is effective for all of our needs. I hope that answers the question. If not, please put a follow-up so that I can speak more directly. Are there any other questions? Are there any other things that I can speak to? I'll give it another minute. And
I had a question. Can I ask a question? I have my hand up.
Yes, sir.
So along the line of Nelson's questions about starting an effective recruiting system, if I'm a nonprofit, I'm looking to reboot the recruitment process or even create a recruitment process where there's not really much of one. Talking about technology, I know you talk about looking at what your needs are and have like a needs-based solution, but is there anything out there you're like, if you can afford it or if you have the staff that can learn it, you should really have this, this, and this as like the base parameters when you're talking about technology? Do they need to, if you're talking to them straight up, do they really need to have an applicant tracking system? They're like, that's just something you cannot live without. What are those things?
So I would 100% recommend that organizations have an applicant tracking system. From a compliance perspective, by organizing and retaining interview data and resumes, that's something that we all have to be aware of and we all have to do. Also, by giving us the advantage of when we go back and we recruit for a position, now maybe we're growing and we're hiring another member services person, so we're building that team, or we're hiring another donor engagement person, or we're hiring a second human resources business partner. By having that applicant tracking system, what it gives us is an internal database of people that we know want to work for this organization. And it's the first place that I like to look for candidates when I open a position. That's definitely where I would start. And there are really, really cost-effective solutions that are scalable so that you can increase feature and capability as the organization grows. But I would highly recommend it. It also saves time, because if you're setting up an Excel spreadsheet, every time a candidate applies, you now have to manually input all of this information that you're tracking. If you have an applicant tracking system, it does that for you. It also keeps track of all of the data that we need when we have to submit our reporting, whether it's about equal opportunity hiring, whether it's about military hiring, veteran hiring, whether it's about hiring people with disabilities. All of those questions that are asked at the end of an application that are voluntary for candidates to answer, that's all done. All that record keeping is kept. So at the end of the year, when you are doing your reporting, it's an easy report to run. So I would absolutely 100% recommend an applicant tracking system as a baseline for every organization. And like I said, there are some that are really, really cost effective. There are others that are excruciatingly, painfully expensive. And some of the lower cost ones are absolutely incredibly dynamic. And I'll tell you, I worked in an organization, we were paying over $15,000 a month. I wanted to switch to a system that cost about $300 a month, because the $300 system, in my estimation, was better. Not just a huge cost savings, but it was just a more dynamic, more current system. But that's definitely where I would start, is that applicant tracking system.
Okay. And is there something conversely that you've come across that you're like, this is cool technology, but it's definitely just a fad. I don't understand why we're trying to automate this. Something where you're like kind of showing your age, like what are you doing here? Right? Is there anything you've run across where you can kind of steer people away from saying, this is flashy, but I'm not quite certain anybody needs to invest time and energy in it?
So absolutely, and not just flashy, but when we look at antiquated technologies, I will say keeping a old-fashioned spreadsheet to do recruiting, it's antiquated. I will say, doing it, and this is just some of the process that we do. If we're not digitizing our offer letters, and with a lot of that digitization of signature, it can be applied throughout an entire organization, not just to the recruiting function, but it can be applied to our financial functions. It can be applied to our, just our board, a lot of different things. So, it's also important, even with the applicant tracking system, which I preach, to make sure we have one that's effective and one that's current and one that is viable. Bringing in one that we had 15 years ago, it's time to look and time to explore something new. So it's important that we don't get too comfortable, and we're always looking to be progressive. But even in looking at some of the more current stuff, within some of the machine learning technology that's out there and some of the automated systems that are out there, you want something that it's helpful to have something that can help you source and find candidates. But ultimately, we have to evaluate those candidates. So what I look at is, does it set me up so that I can do my job? And even though it may automatically rank them, I still go through them. And sometimes the technology, and I agree, sometimes the technology, and I don't. But it is important not to get too caught up and not to lose the human aspect, and not to forget that all of these tools are exactly that. They're tools to help us, as opposed to tools to take over. So, that's what I would be looking at, is making sure that we are staying current, making sure that we are doing what reflects who we are as an organization, and just really engaging with the talent that we need to help drive our missions forward. So if there are any other questions, please let me know. If you have some questions that you'd like to discuss offline, feel free to reach out and let me know. I'm happy to have conversations with this privately if that's something that is valuable as well. But otherwise, again, I really want to thank everybody for sharing this hour with me. I want to thank MAC and 501c Services for the opportunity to engage. And hopefully this is valuable and we get to talk again soon.
Absolutely. Ben, thank you so much for your time. For everybody, our poll will pop up as soon as we turn this puppy off. And I hope everybody has a great rest of the day. I'll talk to you again soon, Ben.
All right. Thank you, Max. Take care.
Thanks, boss. Bye.